Hello, and welcome to. This is a story recap of what has happened so far in Into the Nightmare. The story began with four individuals finding their way in. We have our wonderful gunslinger Deshane. He was in a desert when walked through some fog and found his way in a snowy location rather than the desert he was in. Very complete different location, really. We have our Warforged, Soldier 393, designated as Smasher. He more or less woke up and also walked into some fog, which led to a snowy location, Barovia. And then we had Callus, a childlike character who was of unknown origin. He was asked to come to Barovia by the first one specifically. The first one gave him the promise of many, many rare samples, which ended up being a lie, for lack of a better way of putting it. But, yeah, he convinced Alice to come to Barovia. And then he convinced the goddess Lyra to send one of her champions. Lyra ended up choosing a gnome named Mixinix, one of the Scarlet Murmurs, specifically because Mixinix didn't fit perfectly with the Scarlet Murmurs. She was too much of a bundle of joy, really. And also because that's what the first one asked for, was someone just like Mixinix. So, she sent Mixinix. The four of them made their way into Barovia and eventually found their way to a city called Kresk, where they assisted the people, dealt with a rogue set of werewolves that had been terrorizing the town, the city, the village, the hovel, for lack of a better way of putting it, really. They learned that sometime before they arrived, an army of werewolves came through, decimating everything in their path. Nobody in Kresk knew why or what the reason for anything going on was. All they knew is that one day they were doing their usual, and the next day they were dying to werewolves. A tenth of the people survived.
Yeah, we have more for later. This is for the innkeeper. He needs to get turned too.
Thus the reason why decimation is used. And the party chose to assist them. When they dealt with the rogue pack of werewolves, they found a map which had circled a tower at the edge of some water. So they chose to go check that tower out. This tower ended up being very peculiar. The wizard inside, when they first got there, seemed to invite them in, except when they finally reached the wizard himself. He was very confused as to why they were there and quite abrasive. In fact, they nearly killed him. Instead, though, they learned that the tower was keeping him there, making him build the tower higher, which he was very frightened of. But now he had no choice. He was a prisoner. The party then left with quite literally the tower's blessing and descended into the bowels of the tower, the depths below the tower, really. And from there, they made their way over to some underground warehouse inside of which they found the corpse of a long-dead individual whose skull had looked like a hole had been bored into it. With that, they were attacked by an illithid, which forcibly teleported Mixinix out of the tower, and then got its butt handed to it by the boys. After which they were joined by another Warforged who had similar markings on him as to what Smasher has on him. Turns out they are brothers, created by the same individual, an individual by the name of Cephas. So this new Warforged, named, or rather designated, the Collector, agreed to bring them to Cephas, so that Smasher might meet his father, and they might maybe get some answers, possibly, who knows. Well, they ended up going without Mixinix, unfortunately, and meeting Cephas, and during this meeting, some information was revealed. Callus learned that he did not have long to live. He was an incomplete clone, essentially. But because he was a clone, Cephas grew incredibly curious, maybe a little too curious about Callus.
Yeah, absolutely. I just worry because if you take blood from someone who's told you no, it could get us into some trouble that we might not be able to get out of.
Oh.
So,
okay.
So just...
I'll keep that in mind. Permission first.
Consent is always important.
Agreed.
You're next.
Smasher's head goes back to Callus and does what Deshane does with the fucking narrows his eyes down to the fucking line. It just stares. Keeps on walking forward, but just head right up at Callus and just...
During their time with Cephas, Cephas actually provided them with something of a master key. A key that could, using locks on doors, create a sort of portal from one location to another. This key specifically also being able to move between universes. This key they then used to go ahead and get back to the tower entrance, from where they saw tracks of Mixinixes leading south. South being a location they had learned of by orcs, essentially. When they were in the tower, Mixinix had managed to get a conversation with some orcs they saw on the ground. They learned of a city south in the mountain range, and so she had chosen to go south when she was teleported to the entrance of the tower by the illithid. The rest of the party, when they got to that tower entrance, they had originally planned to return to Kresk, but upon seeing the tracks heading south, they chose to go that way instead. It didn't take them, it took them a day or two, almost 2 days, I believe, to catch up with Mixinix. After which they did find their way to an orc town, an orc city. It quite literally is a city, or was a city at this point, known as Orkin, where they met the ruler, who is known as the Matriarch. The Matriarch managed to get some information from them, managed to give them some information, gave them some assistance, and then in turn gave them access to her forges so that they could upgrade themselves some. And oh, did they upgrade themselves extensively. Smasher went from being Smasher to being, oh, I can't find Smasher. It was quite fantastic. After this, Callus did some more tests on himself and found that he in fact has, or had, far less time to live than he had originally thought. So the party decided to use the key Cephas had given them and return to the place of Calus's origin, a world called Daggerfam, which they did actually manage to do. They got to Daggerfam. They met the people who assisted Calus when he had gotten away from where he was created. These people had with them a baby of an individual known as Yorlandriel. That eventually led them to the place of Calus's origin, where they proceeded through and eventually found that there was no known cure for Calus's problem. Instead, what they did was they put Calus within stasis and hoped that his family or anyone who knew him might find him and save him. That or the party might find a way to save him and then return to pick him up. Spoiler, they did not find a way to save him. Does not rejoin the party into the nightmare. But don't worry, that was not the end of Calus.
React much the same way, like I just did, by going... Not much space to retreat and move back, but then I will stop and go... and breathe all over it. I need a dex saving throw.
After this, the party then had to do a quick escape as something invaded the laboratory they were in and started destroying quite a lot of things. In their retreat, very hasty retreat, they used the key and another individual joined them. This individual resembled a lot like Smasher, held excessively heavy armor on and everything, and ended up being very abrasive on his entrance to the party. But he was able to explain himself and explain what was going on, and in turn, they had him join them. His name was Valisor. When they got back to Barovia, the whole party, Valisor, Mixinix, Duchesne, and Smasher, they learned that Orkin had been attacked by gnolls. There was a gnoll army that seemed to come in and attempt to take over Orkin, but it had not proven fruitful for the gnolls at all, as the matriarch herself had descended into the battle of the field of battle. Turns out she is quite powerful. They then get some more information to the matriarch, and from the matriarch, learn of where it is that the werewolf army currently is located, and get a little information about more going on that direction. So, based off of some things Duchesne could see and some things they had heard of, they decided to head northwest. But to do that, they first went to the tower again, which actually, most specifically, before they went to the tower, they were attacked by gnolls again, who, during the process of being attacked by these gnolls, an individual known as Alfonso, who happened to be a werewolf, ended up helping them. In him helping them, they chose to help him find the werewolves and maybe find a solution for his own problem. So he joins the party at this point. They then go to the tower and get into the tower again because the tower recognizes them and loves them, and learn that some level of time magic is being used in this tower. The wizard who was abrasive and rude to them was no longer there. In fact, he was quite dead. Probably old age, long time ago, as far as he's concerned. For them, it was not that long. It was a couple days. Actually, it was a couple weeks because they were in Daggerford for a couple of weeks. But they instead meet his great-great, or so on and so forth, granddaughter. Another wizard, very powerful. She assists them and teleports them directly to the wolves, where they meet the leader of the wolves, known as Vlad. Now, turns out Vlad had utilized his army, having done something like this before in his past. He had come through Barovia specifically, and destroyed everything in a bid to weaken the Dark Lord, and it had worked. When he caught up to Strahd himself, he destroyed Strahd, actually killing the Dark Lord and taking his place as the Dark Lord of Barovia. Mixie Nix, through her words, manages to form a kind of connection with Vlad, and in turn convinces Vlad and the Matriarch, though the Matriarch doesn't need too much convincing for it, mostly Vlad, to talk and maybe even align themselves with each other, both of them being powerful individuals. They, after this, leave Alfonso with Vlad and his packs so that Alfonso can learn some more of himself. And they head further north, where they find a demon that Valsor has been hunting, and destroy him, literally. They get some information, some more details of Valsor's past, and then they head even further north, only to find a strange inn in the middle of the forest, with a sign hanging from it saying, "The Ever-Present Inn." Inside, they meet another demon, Lyra. She sort of teases Mixie Nix a little bit, in which Mixie Nix kind of returns the teasing a little bit. She's odd. She's clearly an unnerving individual. But there wasn't too bad of a connection there. Valsor thankfully did not notice that she was a demon. Otherwise he probably would have tried to kill her.
Leave us alone, or I will not hesitate.
I won't hesitate, bitch.
What the fuck?
Spider, to kill her. They spend quite a bit of time in this inn, to the point of Smasher going to visit Cephas again. This time with Mixie Nix in tow, who Mixie Nix then learns of Cephas and more of his machinations as well. And the start of Cephas's connection with the party is shaky at best. He, before Ravenloft, he was not a good individual. He tended to do evil, just naturally, because that's how he tended to lean. However, upon getting to Ravenloft and then meeting the party, trying to clone himself, only to find out that he can't clone himself, some cosmic power stopping him, he chooses to change his path. Instead of going the usual rate of whatever he wants on whatever he needs to do to get it done, he chose to do the thing he doesn't normally do and be a good guy. And it does take some convincing of Mixie Nix for Mixie Nix to actually let him convince her, essentially. There's kind of a pseudo promise to get some connection with the Matriarch. And then they return, and once again, Mixie Nix meets Sylvie, the wizard, or sorry, she wasn't named Sylvie at this point. She was just a wizard from that tower. She doesn't want to have a W name, like her father had given her, so they give her the name of Sylvie. And that is what she ends up going by. After an extended stay at this inn, as well as maybe making some adjustments to the inn itself, the party find their way back to Orkin. In Orkin, they make some connections with Vlad and the matriarch, learn that they have made an alliance. Smasher manages to create a connection between Cephas and the matriarch, much to the rest of the party's chagrin, since they had come to the agreement that they weren't going to do that outside of Smasher's knowledge. Unfortunately for them, when they came to that decision, he had already done it. So, but also, fortunately for them, doing it did end up being a good move. More on that later. However, while they were there, something drastic happened. It was like reality suddenly collapsed in on the party, and they felt the full weight of existence upon them, trying to crush them. As they all blacked out, they eventually found, or rather woke up again, this time within a cave system, with no idea where they were or what they were doing. They started to wander around. Well, more specifically, they were about to start wandering around when they were interrupted by something running by. This something then being followed by another individual who was very similar to Alfonso in many ways. The party hadn't fully gotten Alfonso's story. They'd only gotten a little bit of what he was willing to tell them. But they did hear where he was from. And this new individual they meet, whose name ends up being Nereza, is from the same place. And has been hunting Alfonso as he killed her family. So the party teams up with Nereza, and they follow whatever it was that Nereza had originally been following, eventually finding their way to a very strange sanctuary run by a beholder named Zem. Through the use of Zem's psychic power and pools, Zem is able to show Mixie Nix a little bit more about her past. A little bit of how Mixie Nix is truly Fae, and less known than she realized. After this, the party then goes to solve the issue of where the denizens of this place had gone, which they learn is named Blutsburg. The denizens originally being a bunch of Illithid. In doing this, they find Nereza's uncle, who Nereza had been traveling with, and they find a group called the Conclave of Oblex, who assist them in clearing the mountain of the undead Illithid that were left. It turns out a Warforged army came through here and killed the Illithid. Cephas is on the move, or was. After some interactions with cosmic beings and getting information out and information in, the party learn of another demon in Blutsburg named the Alclith, who they learn could help them, specifically Valisor, get to a place where many of his quarry might be. This ends up being true. The Alclith sends Nereza to specifically to Markov, wow. That's another character that comes in way later. To Vlad the werewolf, who has found himself in Borca. He and his werewolf armies are now currently warring in Borca against whatever faction they had found there. And Nereza joins them. Obviously, she's there specifically to find Alfonso and preferably kill him. But the party never truly finds out what happens in that case. The Alcolith then sends the party hell. Or at least a plain cold hell in Ravenloft.
Wow!
What is your name?
My name is Markov. Markov Deleviaskivia Drovoshkibia.
I will write that down and remember it.
Flip it. Flip
Yes, you must.
That shit is happening. Someone else has to clip this. Someone else has to.
Okay, right off the
Just
top
clip the
of my
name.
head.
That's gonna
Clip it,
happen
clip
on my
it. The name.
review, and I'm going to
Yes.
write it down and I'm going to say it.
Their antics in hell were wild, for one. They meet Charon and travel on the river Styx. They find some of Valsor's quarry, some having lost their minds, other meeting a very drastic end. Mixinix makes a friend with an imp, who eventually becomes Sylvie's familiar. And they finally make their way to a place where Lyra, the daemoness that Mixinix had met at the inn, was ruling-ish. Her mother was technically the ruler, but her mother was quite pinned. Her mother was also known as the Red Queen. While they were conversing with Lyra, they learned that Valisor's greatest enemy, a demon named Richard, was about to attack. So they went out and met him, and a whole lot of chaos ensued. Madness everywhere, demons dying. They learned that this isn't really hell, and a lot of these demons aren't really the demon of which they are dealing with. They're just echoes of those demons.
Where are the others?
What others?
Everything you know. Speak.
I don't know what you're talking
I
about!
break the arm.
Snap. Ah! And Deshane, as you walk up to the thing, is just screaming in terror and pain. And the wall of fire around you is pretty hot. Mixinix meets an individual named Lord Otteroth and learns that her mother was once in hell and traveled with three individuals: Lord Otteroth, an individual known as the Beast, and herself. But the Red Queen had killed her and cast her pieces across hell. Mixinix finding the bones of her mother and gathering them. They then defeat Richard, or at least think they defeat Richard, though much to Valisor's disappointment, it was far too easy. And the first one comes. He doesn't like this version of hell. He doesn't really like hell at all, so he decides to destroy it. And in doing so, he sends the party to different locations, or more specifically back to Cephas. However, he does tell the party what he's doing in the process, and as a result, they stop being his ally. They choose to move away from him and be counter to him. And so they end up back with Cephas, who assists Valisor in going back out into Ravenloft, eventually the multiverse in general, by sending multiple Warforged to assist him at times, and even giving him information anytime he learns of it. This does, however, mean that Valisor leaves the party. Not really a question for Valisor. He knew it was coming, and he chose to walk away from the party, vastly due to the fact that he had his own job, and he was learning that he was not going to solve it being in Ravenloft. So he needed to leave. Cephas then brings them to the matriarch, who had found her way into Falkovnia with Orkin. Specifically, the whole city of Orkin ended up in Falkovnia. They catch up, get some information, tell the matriarch of the fate of the werewolves.
Sniff it. Sniff it, Smasher. Sniff it.
Yeah, eat the rich, folks. Anyway.
I'm pretty sure Smasher would taste good too.
And while they are there, they get introduced to a new creature, a small individual named Emme, a Harengon, who, even though her start is a little shaky with the party, she steals Deshane's guns and nearly gets shot by him. She's adorable, and they very happily welcome her in. Cephas then brings the party to Sylvie, who, her tower survived Barovia's collapse. She shoved it into a kind of void realm, but the void realm's not exactly empty. There are towers everywhere in this void realm. There's probably a couple hundred of them, and she ends up showing the party that. While there, the party learned that she is indeed working with the first one, but only in as much as she can get information from him to the rebels that are starting to grow. The rebels including the matriarch, Vlad, Cephas, and the party, and now also Sylvie. While also there, Mixinix goes out and finds a tower that is very Fey-like. She proceeds to enter said tower and finds an elf Fey who doesn't particularly talk, but offers her dinner. The two of them make a form of connection there, but it ends up being evident that this elf is about to die. She's very old. And she has recognized in Mixinix an aspect of the Feywild. So she gives Mixinix all of her power. Because of the type of Fey she is, she can't just die and let her power fade off into the multiverse. No, her power actually has to go somewhere specific. And so she makes it go to Mixinix. And Mixinix finds out that she has the power of spring and autumn in the sense of fairies and the Fae. This does spark something within Mixinix, a need to find her mother, or what's left of her mother's spirit. So she ends up visiting the Fey realm of Death and having a conversation with Death himself. He tells her that in order to properly come to this realm, she needs to access a third tower. Or not a third tower, but rather access multiple towers to open a doorway, essentially. While that is happening, Deshane learns of a Crimson Tower that mimics the properties of the Dark Tower he seeks. And so the party goes to check this out. Eventually all of them going at the same time. They do find this Crimson Tower surrounded by a field of black roses, and do eventually start to climb this tower. However, as they are climbing it, it becomes even more evident to Deshane that just like with Valsor and Hell, this is just a vicious mock of his universe. It is just a mirror image of it. And when they get to a certain specific room, they find an old... Well, she's more of a friend now than she was before. They find Lyra, the demon. And she is currently being, for lack of a better way of putting it, tortured by a very large, black leather clad, horrifying entity. This entity proceeds to, well, show the work he's done, which is killing everyone in the tower and beheading them. And then attempts to kill Lyra. But,
Fuck it.
But, Mixie Nix manages to save Lyra, and the rest of the party manages to hold off this individual long enough for them to get out. They do leave, though, instead of fighting this individual, because it becomes very evident this individual is not weak in any way whatsoever. And as they are leaving, they meet with Cephas, who gets the idea to take over this Crimson Tower, which he does do. He takes over the Crimson Tower and never finds the entity they ran into, because the entity had left. So now the party has Sylvia's Tower and this Crimson Tower. They end up going to look for another, but before they do, they decide to gather their allies. And in doing so, they find out that Zem, more accurately, Blutspur, has now collapsed as well. And Zem is also in Falkovnia, her sanctuary and all. The Beholder very quickly joining the rebels. No real need to convince her at all. She can see what's going on, the plight everyone has. And it's pretty clear that for a Beholder, she's a very, very friendly individual. A lot of them make their plan, telling everyone what they are doing. They are going to seek a third tower, then they are going to use the power of the towers to open a door to death, the Fey realm of death, so that Mixie Nix can find her mother. So they go back out into the void to find another tower, and they do eventually find one. They get rejoined by Lord Atroth as well at this point, who kind of shows that he considers himself an uncle to Mixie Nix, for lack of a better way of putting it, because of his connection with her mother. But he doesn't think he's her father. So with his help, they find a third tower. They enter the tower and they take the tower. It does lead to them to finding out the tower is owned by a dragon, a very powerful silver dragon named Bahamut. He did not remember his name until after they got back to Sylvie's Tower, and the matriarch's mate, who happens to be a dragon named Guardian, recognizes him. The two of them fight briefly. Just a means for Bahamut, essentially, to get some entertainment and some knowledge. And Bahamut ends up revealing that Guardian is in fact one of 7 aspects of Tiamat. You'd think, why 7? Tiamat only had 5 heads. Well, there are 7 aspects of her, it would seem. And so, Guardian being one of those aspects, Bahamut and Guardian form a sort of alliance. Guardian does not have any of Tiamat's evil nature. Any evil he has is very strictly controlled by the matriarch, and he is definitely the matriarch's mate. He supports her fully. With this third tower, the party then opens a doorway. This doorway leading to death. They find Mixie Nix's mother. And Mixie Nix finds that her mother is in fact her. Not exactly to the sense of, oh no, it's reincarnation. No, it's a little more complicated than that. It's Fey complicated, for one. You see, every 13,000 years or so, one of the 3 entities that created the Feywild rebirths herself, or recreates herself. Now, she does do this by giving birth to a child, and then that child eventually taking on the power that her mother had, which includes all of her mother's memories, which means all of the memories of her mother's before that. Mixie Nix is quite a bit more powerful now. She is essentially becoming a god, a fairy god. Mixie Nix also then learns that her father is the Beast, and the Beast was a dragon, a 3-headed dragon, and also one of the 7 aspects of Tiamat. This dragon's name is Ma'amarth. And using Bahamut, she's able to get Ma'amarth to join them. However, when they get back to tragedy.
Yeah, fuck it. I'm gonna use...
The tower that used to be Sylvie's tower is gone. It's been destroyed. In fact, almost every tower in this realm has been destroyed. There are now just 2 towers. Crimson Tower, which is no longer crimson. It is now a pure white tower, surrounded by a field of black roses. And a purple tower, which very clearly is the first one's tower. Guardian and Bahamut are fighting what looks like a dragon-like creature that the first one has summoned. And Bahamut eventually manages to reach out and contact Ma'amarth, bringing him there as well. Mixie Nix and Ma'amarth do manage to connect. They all go to the Crimson Tower, climb to the top of it, and while they're watching the fight ensue, Mixie Nix gets a brilliant idea. In all their travels, Mixie Nix has been contacting multiple different entities. She's contacted an entity known as the Great Old One. He's a void being of a sort. She had managed to contact and stay in contact with the Matriarch, Zem, Vlad, Cephas. Communication is really something she's getting the handle of. The entity she reaches out to, she refers to as Alpha, though truthfully he has no name. They have no name. This entity had talked with Mixie Nix once before, interrupting her call to the Great Old One to have a conversation with her. And surprisingly enough, though Smasher doesn't yet remember it, Smasher and Callus have both interacted with this individual as well. Mixie Nix succeeds in contacting him and succeeds in convincing him that the first one is a problem and needs to be dealt with. So, this being that she calls Alpha shows up. Now, in this recap, I'm just gonna let you guys all know a little secret about this guy. He chose the name 13 because it was the first thing that came to his brain when she asked him what his name was. He thought, well, 13's not one that I am called anymore, so 13 will be one I will be called again. And he chose the name 13. So now she calls him 13. He was powerful enough to literally cause the 4 massive draconian beings to stop. Just simply time stop. And he was powerful enough to create an image of Ravenloft as it was at that moment, seeing exactly what it was the first one was doing with ease. Though in truth, he knew what the first one was doing before he got there. In fact, this entity kind of knows what's going to happen as it's happening. For lack of a better way of putting it, this is my multiverse's version, or as close as my multiverse will ever get, of God. But even this entity will tell you he is not God, nor is he a god. In fact, he does not consider himself to be worshipable. Though, of all the entities the party will meet, he's the only one actually worth worshiping, because he's the only one who can truly save you. But enough of that. He is not all-powerful. He is knowing of most things. He has an approximate knowledge of many things. And his power is beyond compare. So much so that he pulls this purified Crimson Tower out of Ravenloft and places it into Shane's universe. A universe he has no control over. This entity moved this tower to a universe he doesn't exist in. But it saves those people. It saves the people that were left after the first one had attacked Falkovnia, the Void, destroying everything. He even brings back the demon Lyra, and Sylvie, who Sylvie had actually died. She had been killed by the first one. And this entity 13 brought her back. Lyra, she was not killed. She was just not present and would have been stuck in Ravenloft, or what would eventually not be Ravenloft anymore either, which 13 didn't want to have happen. Speaking of the other denizens of Ravenloft, which there are thousands and thousands and thousands, including Vlad and his werewolves, as well as a whole nother party, this entity does actually pull out of Ravenloft and stick in another universe. Each and every single person, he saves them all. And then he takes Ravenloft and the first one. And I guess you're just going to have to find out what he does with that, if the party ever finds out what he does with that, because we have now caught up with the timeline. That is a very brief, quick overview. I definitely don't go into details about many different things that happen throughout the whole story. You should go back and watch the videos. By the way, I went back and watched the videos at 2x speed and was still able to follow along with everything. So if you wanted to cut down that 4-hour time down to about 2 hours per video, run it at 2-hour speed. We speak slow enough during our sessions that it's really not that hard to follow at 2x speed. But yeah, that will be all you get from this DM. Enjoy the rest of the video. Enjoy later videos. We will be back live in a couple of weeks. So your vision kind of looks, it looks further down than what you think it should be, or further beyond than what you think it should be. And
Did something I say distract you?
What's up? Look, a lot happened. Okay.
That was really good timing, guys, not gonna lie. I didn't notice any communication beforehand, so moving on.
What were you saying? Sorry. Zelda referenced body horror, so I had to do something horrific in the chat.
Oh yeah, well.
It's delightful.
It's good. Anywho, so I
may have closed for now. We hope you met a friend this go around. Tired and blurry you may be. We hope your minds are full from this revelry. Peace follow you out. May you return for more giggles and shouts.